Ambassador Hennesey-Niland over here. I guess I can't stand behind there because we're getting feedback. So we have joining us Ambassador John Hennesey-Niland, who's our current U.S. Ambassador to Palau. Sitting here live with us, I have Ambassador Cella, who's formerly the U.S. Ambassador to Fiji. I'm going to get this right, just so please correct me. Fiji, Tuvalu, Nauru, Kiribati, and Tonga, that's right. And next we have Lindberg, who is from the South Dakota deck, and previously with Exim Bank Chief of Staff as well. So, as we know, exporting to and business development islands can be challenging for a lot of our small and medium-sized U.S. firms as our deck members. However, there are a broad range of interesting opportunities that we can talk about no matter what our business focus is. And these opportunities range from potential Exim financing support to resources that are utilized for medical applications, infrastructure development at smaller scales to support basic needs of enhanced U.S. military presence on different islands like aviation, energy, clean water, construction, healthcare, etc. And for our U.S. territories in the Caribbean and Pacific, there are other additional opportunities that should be considered. So today we're going to be talking about focusing on the Pacific Islands, but I want to emphasize that when we say island nations, this could refer to any grouping of islands. So obviously for our deck members in Puerto Rico on the back here, we could be applying the same concepts to Puerto Rico or to island countries like the Philippines or Indonesia. So we'll look at opportunities and challenges that U.S. firms have in developing island-based markets and investments, geopolitical considerations that impact businesses operating in island regions, challenges for businesses, and business funding opportunities. So let me start off with a little geography question for Ambassador Cella and Hennesey-Niland here. We call the Pacific Island region first and second island chain. Do either of you have any thoughts on this, on the reason for this, and how this might shape regional business activity? Just want to give that a shot?
I'm going to let my elder statesman, brother, and dear friend, Ambassador Hennesey-Niland, who's an expert in all things in the Pacific, to take the lead off that.
That's very kind. It was great to see you. I thank Elizabeth for organizing the panel. Obviously, I thank NADEC and the annual Expo Conference and everyone who organized this. I hope you can hear me and see me. It's a little after 11 p.m. on Friday evening here in Palau. I mentioned that just to try to emphasize how important this conference and this particular conversation is. Yes, many Americans may not be able to tell the difference between the first and the second island chains. I sit in Palau, which is the anchor of that second island chain, just to the right of the Philippines. This is a small, stable republic in free association with the United States. And the reason it's so strategic, both in terms of our military and defense capacity, and also because of the economic opportunities, I think it's important to understand where this place is. It is close to a fault line in terms of the geopolitics, but it also provides great opportunity, particularly for business. As the U.S. military and the U.S. government are stepping up, we are seeing huge investment in terms of military infrastructure. And along with that, a large number of contracting opportunities, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. And that is very, very, I think, important to understand that even now, if you went on to USA.gov website, the contracting opportunities, even in this small distant location called Palau. And so the first and second island chain may seem far away, but in all honesty, they're very connected to the United States and to business opportunities. So with that bit of geography, happy to turn it back to Elizabeth for more questions.
And I would just compliment what Ambassador Hennesey-Niland said, and quantifying trade on an annual basis, $5 trillion in trade transits that region known as the South China Sea, and obviously a very regards to lay claims that ruled in court, even legitimate claims, but certainly not only a strategic military standpoint, but rich gas and other deposits as well.
I think you also have some other issues in that region. So, we have so many resources in that particular area. What other unique business opportunities are available? You have maybe lack of competition, cultural loyalty, and so on. What are your thoughts on business opportunities in the region?
Maybe I can go on this. Recently I was involved, one of the things that I think we're really trying to work on from a U.S. national security, economic security perspective is shoring up our supply chain of critical minerals and rare earth deposits. And there's a fair amount of need. For example, we import 100% of the graphite we need, and in about every lithium-ion battery that's made, it takes about 20 to 30% graphite in order to produce it. And so how can we continue to produce electric vehicles and F-35s and other things that require certain battery metals when we're importing 100% of those from places like China? Over 90% of the rare earth that we do use in our economy are imported directly from China. And so in that region, the Clarion-Clipperton zone, Clipperton zone, there are these undersea nodules that are known to be the highest density qualification of some of these rare earths known to man, and there's an ability to go down and actually suck these things off the ocean floor and bring them up and then process them into many of the minerals that we need to succeed. Most people don't know about this opportunity, but a lot of these island chains have jurisdiction over those particular parts of the sea, and working with them, there are companies that are taking a look at how do we do that in a sustainable way, and then make sure that those resources end up in U.S.-friendly companies, allies, opportunities to succeed. So I think there are things that people don't necessarily know about or come off the top in terms of food and ag or other sort of natural exports that exist.
I think we think of islands primarily as vacation spots, so this is sort of a new one for me as well. I did not know that there are rare earths in those particular islands. So when you look at that, do you see Chinese activity looking at those rare earths as well? Or are we just talking about Chinese activity looking at fishing resources and other similar items?
On a happy note, just off the Cook Islands, an Australian company that's collaborating with some U.S. investors was just approved in their exclusive economic zone to mine those nodules, they're called, beginning quite soon. China is very aggressive. They have an interesting sway and influence with the International Seabed Authority, which is a UN body that regulates this. The Republic of Nauru, to which I was accredited, has struggled mightily with the ISA to have that approved. They're going to persist, but you made a great point. There are trillions in value of these rare earth metals, properly done, sustainable, and there is technology that the Aussies are using off the Cook Islands. So I'm quite hopeful, and I do know that the Chinese are prowling around in the zone for these nodules, seeing and you see the state, you see the nature of the ball, so to speak, the way in the Pacific.
So in prior NADEC conferences, and certainly in this one, we've discussed a lot of Chinese development activities. As we can see, this particular area, the first and second island chains, are definitely not immune from Chinese development activities. Ambassador Hennesey-Niland, what kind of Chinese activity are you seeing in Palau, if any?
Thank you. In some great comments from the panelists just now. I'll give you the real example of Palau that I've seen in the 2.5 years that I've been here. Obviously, the exclusive economic zones of these island nations are vast, and I think people perhaps are amazed at the scale. If you transpose the exclusive economic zones of these island nations onto a map of the continental United States, roughly the same size, if not larger. We're talking a blue continent, not just a blue ocean. And these countries like to be called large ocean nations, not small island countries. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of resources in their economic zones. Fisheries is well known. But the rare earth materials is certainly something that's of strategic importance. And we're just literally, no pun intended, beginning to scratch at the surface of that. And it's no secret to the PRC either. We've had incursions by PRC research vessels into the exclusive economic zone of Palau the time that I've been here. They've been uninvited. They have not followed the normal procedures of sharing the research that they do while in these waters. And Palau is concerned that they're here for surveying and possibly at some point exploring further and exploiting those resources. We've seen similar activities, not just here in the second island chain, but all throughout the first island chain. So there's a real challenge here in a contest. And I think American business should be concerned, but just as it's a challenge, it also poses a great opportunity. Because American business is going to need these materials. We have great partners in the Pacific, and we should be doing more to demonstrate our interest in these particular resources.
So I think we can all definitely agree that American businesses should be doing more. What incentives, are there any incentives for American businesses to operate in this area? Maybe Lou can address some exit opportunities perhaps.
Yeah, look, I think the U.S. government provides a whole toolkit of resources. We've talked about many of them throughout this conference today, the past couple of days, right? So the Export-Import Bank is certainly open for business in this part of the world. It's trade credit insurance, can ship to there. One of the, I think, in my opinion, unique type of opportunities with respect to these rare earths and critical minerals is that the Department of Energy right now just announced a $30 billion loan program to help develop the processing capacity we need to process these kinds of minerals, right? And so if there is an opportunity to go out and get access to them, you need the processing capacity as well. So whether it's exporting directly or partnering with these countries and then bringing them back to the U.S. to onshore the actual capability to translate them from raw minerals into process capacity that then go into the end products, I think there's an entire spectrum of U.S. government tools that can play in that space. I know the Development Finance Corporation has done a fair amount of work trying to get some boots on the ground and work more, specifically on some island nation projects. When I was at XM, we did a tour, not to the island nations, but in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. We were out there to try to, explain the might of the U.S. government, and there was a lot of receptivity to how can we invest and bring U.S. companies along through the tools the government has to offer.
Complementing what Luke said, while I was at Post, had the occasion to sign investment incentive agreements with Tuvalu and Nauru. So that basically is a DFC vehicle where it helps mobilize private investment to those countries, known as micro-states as well. Also with Ambassador Lighthizer, he signed virtually the trade investment framework agreement with Fiji, which again expands and deepens bilateral trade ties with them. And I was talking to my former defense attaché just yesterday, and he said, now retired, living there in Fiji, and he has said just over the last year there's a craving and a demand for just raw U.S. goods. So in Extra Supermarket, which is they have multiple in Fiji, you see even more beautiful USA products on the shelves. And again, on the other side of the pandemic, through the pandemic and on the other side of the pandemic, it's happy to see that.
I think the additional thing I'd like to add, since Phil isn't on the line, is that what we're looking at in this particular region, because of the strategic location of the island chains, is that there's a fair amount of American military interest, and therefore a need for the support for military infrastructure. So in Tinian, we're looking at the construction of American military bases, and this is not just American base construction, but the fact that we have to build the entire infrastructure to go along with the bases. The dock at Tinian, which David and I have seen a prior trip, has enough space to unload one 40-foot container, if you're lucky. I agree. And therefore, you need construction. How are you going to build a base if you cannot unload your containers? How are you going to import goods to sustain a base of Marines and Air Force men without infrastructure, running water, construction, and so on? I have a question back here. Would you like the microphone for that?
I can talk loudly enough.
Okay.
My name is Nate Lamar. I'm with the Indiana District Export Council, and I'm an advisory board member for NADEC. I'm now employed by GM Defense, General Motors Defense, and we are working with the now forming Marine Littoral Regiment in the Pacific, in these island chains. So we are on top of that. I'm limited as to what I can say, but I know exactly the challenges that we're facing. Now, our products, we do want to sell them not only to the U.S. Marine Corps, but also directly to many of the island governments. So I would like to speak with Ambassador Cella afterwards. Thank you.
Sure. Rick?
I don't think you can hear me. I'm Rick Grant from Kentucky Deck, and I'm the vice board as well. We do have for this type of training, and we also, I'd like to know if we can contact the UCX. I don't know which one, but we have environmental equipment that we go for money for the engineering company. So if we can contact somebody like that, would that help us get to these potential customers?
So the UCX, which is the U.S. Export Assistance Centers in the United States, should be able to connect you with the commercial attachés in the embassy. You might guess, but I'll let the ambassadors handle that piece. But I think that's the connection point you're looking for. Frankly.
Ambassador Hennesey-Niland actually was at the embassy in Suva several years before I arrived, so his breadth and depth of experience is great. I'm sure he can speak to that as well. But I know that with respect to Fiji, I mean, there's active gold mining underway there, as you may know, and we have a good team at the embassy led by my former deputy, Sherman.
Ambassador, maybe you'd like to address the military needs in Palau as well.
Happy to, and it is an important opportunity. Just in Palau, and just give you again a little bit of context, Palau has the second largest landmass in Micronesia after Guam. People forget that. It's not as small as you might imagine. There are a number of current U.S. military investments underway in Palau and many more planned. A number of contracting opportunities already existing, looking for prime and subcontractors for small and medium enterprises, and a number of others coming online. And Elizabeth, as you mentioned, they range across the infrastructure spectrum. Palau is eager to get U.S. investment, partner with U.S. military plans, from ports to airports to the connectors, the roads, the life support systems in terms of energy, clean water, buildings, construction, healthcare. There's going to be a growing need for partnership between private and public sector, particularly in that military sphere. And we don't talk necessarily anymore about large bases, but if you add up the aggregate of the dual use and multi-use type facilities that we're talking about, using ports that are also commercial ports, assisting with the development of airports that can also assist the U.S. military projection of power. There's numerous opportunities in the Pacific, not just in Palau. But the difference about Palau, let's make a pitch for this, and of course, I'm a cheerleader for U.S. investment in Palau, but across the Pacific. But here in Palau, don't forget, it's one of the 3 freely associated states. That means it uses the U.S. dollar, right? It has a very pro-business president who was born in the United States. We have responsibility for the defense and security of this country, so it's extremely safe and secure. So it is a perfect place for U.S. investment of any scale, and that scale is growing. So, and as I caught some of the question previous, the embassies are your platforms. We are here to advocate for American business. I'm up late on a Friday night because this is important. And I know that Joe would say the same thing when he was in Fiji. Your ambassadors are your cheerleaders. And we are here to promote U.S. business.
Ambassador, there's a lot of water to cover. You know, we look at the Pacific Islands and other island groups such as Indonesia on the map, and the first thing that comes to mind is water. There's just so much water, and when we're talking about transporting rare earths or other exports between the islands, there's a lot of distance to cover. We joke at the Hawaii Deck that the Hawaii Deck is the largest piece of real estate because its jurisdiction technically encompasses the entire Pacific. Well, that's a lot of space. So how do we overcome these infrastructure issues? And how do businesses operating in the islands cope with the infrastructure challenge? Anybody
I'll
want to
go
start?
first and maybe Joe can. I'll go first and maybe I'll turn it to the panelists next. You know, in the Pacific, they have a slightly different perspective. They see the oceans as connectors, right? Not as barriers that link the islands with the mainland. So that transport is a key part of that link between the United States, Hawaii, U.S. territories, Treaty Associated States, and other sovereign nations in the Pacific. I'll also make the point, don't forget, we're not just talking about things that go on the surface. Don't forget that we have a large number of fiber optic cables underneath that connect the islands to the mainland. Here in Palau, we are very fortunate to have one fiber optic link, and there's going to be a second that comes online the year after next. And so there are numerous ways that we are connecting these small markets to the larger international marketplace. But in terms of shipping, there already is mature shipping connections between the islands and the United States. Matson, a great U.S. shipping company, is one of the major players out here. There are a number of others as well. And in addition, obviously, for those items that need quick delivery, there's great aviation service here too. Most of the islands have now an international airport. Palau actually has a busy one because typically people come here to dive and swim and enjoy the pristine paradise that is Palau. But those same planes are bringing cargo back and forth. Not too long ago, they were bringing a lot of tuna to Japan for people to enjoy sushi. So there's connections already, but there's also opportunities to build on those. And we're happy to assist in that regard. Joe, what was your experience? You know, Suva is a major regional hub, including its port.
Yeah, I think now I've been in contact with people there with developments and other enterprises, and as you can imagine, the pandemic. Long Beach Shipyard, I think, probably has about 60 ships in it right now on any given day. But Shanghai, it's hundreds. And so in the midterm, for those of you that may be in the shipping industry, he sees Peel go out saying that in the midterm, there's great need, demand, opportunities to make money for shipping and logistics to really augment what's out there. They have a barge, and they've been they're making money on the barge because there is such demand, pent-up demand. I think that will last, I think, a few years. So there's I think a niche moment to make some money there. But I do think when I was there at Fiji, I dubbed it Pearl of the Pacific because it is so uniquely fertile. People are warm and loving, and a bounteous place. You drop something in the ground and it will grow. Again, I think for the agricultural sector, I think that some best practices, Western best practices, can benefit them. They do import a lot from Australia, New Zealand. They probably always will, but I think they can really scale up and through some partnerships. I think be almost a regional hub for providing ag, many things ag, to other island countries. And there's as John spoke to the network, whether it's over ship, but also I would say decent aviation infrastructure that I think another opportunity exists to scale that up and make money. Probably would involve some rehabilitation of runways in some places. But I think that's an opportunity also waiting in the wings. And to give you an idea, one thing I think it was a month or two after I left, Kiribati had an evacuation zone on the north shore of ET Lake, the main island in Fiji, where the capital of Suva is. And this was in the event that, their country is consumed by the ocean. This is where they would evacuate to, how many square kilometers it is. But apparently, I guess their fears were eased. It was no longer a crisis. So after Kiribati switched their allegiance from Taiwan to Beijing a few months before I arrived, they really started planting roots deep and collaborating on any number of things. The most immediate thing after my departure was converting that evacuation zone to an ag project, again, driven by the PRC. I mean, it is a layup that we missed, and there are other opportunities out there for us to seize in any number of sectors. I would be remiss in not talking about two. I mean, I think you spoke about this earlier, Elizabeth. I think tourism will still grow in Fiji and all of these island nations. There's a great opportunity. So the development I'm speaking of is in the smaller island, northern island. The next largest island in Fiji is called Vanuatu. And if you go online and look at Naui Island, N-A-W-I, is a beautiful super luxe yacht resort. It will, I know this, until I got engaged, but they're super yachts, but they're apparently mega yachts. Many of them are being seized these days. But there is a growing market, believe it or not, for these slips and this type of tourism. And I think there will be many opportunities for provisioning of other U.S. grants to locate in that northern island of Vanuatu, Fiji. It will be complemented by soon enough. The World Bank is working on the expansion of the runway to receive aircraft, perhaps as large as 737s. So I'm a glass half full person. You see a lot of what the Chinese PRC has done there through SOEs, and there's a wake of destruction in what they've done. So there's foundationally between the United States and all of these Pacific Island nations, irrespective of your faith, they have no faith, but they're just Judeo-Christian rooted. They're people devoted to their faith, their family, and there is much affection and affinity, despite the noise we've heard in the media and geopolitics the last few years. There's great love, and if given a chance, they are certainly far more inclined to the West.
I think one observation from this discussion is that the Pacific Islands are definitely at the cusp of this discussion of national security and economic security, and that there's so many linkages between the two because of the strategic location of those islands, and also looking at the economic opportunities that you've just discussed. A lot of them are tied to promoting American businesses and American soft power in the region. It's a really interesting connection that we're seeing in practice here. So I think we have a question from Frank from the White Pacific Export Council, actually.
Well, if you're seeing opportunities in development, further development of tourism in the region,
Yeah.
can you speak specifically about how that may relate to opportunities to export services such as architectural designs, resort development, civil engineering, hospitality training, things like that?
It's great, great question. I think that this development and others that are being talked about will have a rising tide effect. I mean, in America, many expats on the ground there that are working with the Fiji USA Business Council, so I think that would be a good place to integrate with and become a new quantity with those on the ground there. So I think that it will probably be a couple of years before I think they're still wobbling and recovering from the pandemic. But I do think there are many opportunities. I think with respect to hospitality, they're welcoming, loving of people, as I mentioned, and when you're at a resort, there is concierge luxury. It's something very special. And with their unique way, one other opportunity, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it to you, is, this is a depart from your question, and forgive me for this, but it is call centers. So there's great interest and great demand. I think the cost for standing up such an infrastructure, they have the requisite phone lines necessary are going to improve. But that's another trade opportunity, I think, for those that may need telecom to consider it. As they're looking for opportunities, companies I know, other than where they typically go, Philippines and others. But I think Fiji is a prime opportunity. But I'm happy to talk to you after further detail.
And we'll open this up to questions.
On that part, Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna jump in. You know, the one agency that like is often forgotten about during these discussions is the U.S. Trade Development Agency, and U.S. TDA, as they're literally called in DC, can support feasibility studies and do some of these engineering design work programs that oftentimes will then lead to a U.S. export. So if there is a project where somebody's going to build a resort or something to that effect, you can use U.S. engineering firms, and the government will actually fund some aspect of that. You have to have a local partner on the ground that will basically sign off on the work that's being done, but it sounds like the local population would be amenable and willing to work with you on that. So if you're partnering with somebody local, but it's a U.S. export like a resort, you can actually get the feasibility study and some of the initial legwork done and paid for by the U.S. government.
So I'm going to wrap up this discussion so we can really open it up to questions. I'm sure our Puerto Rico contingent in the back here looks like they might have some questions here. So for our panelists, if you could give one piece of advice to a business looking at operating in the Pacific Islands, what would you recommend?
These guys are going to have better responses than I am, just based on their resumes. But mine is, I mean, really, this rare earth critical mineral thing right now is absolutely massive. I mean, I go back to the graphite example. In the next 5 years, graphite demand is supposed to increase 20 to 22%, according to the Department of Energy, in the United States. So that's one example. Manganese is a major part of these nodules in the sea there. If you are interested in getting into mineral mining, energy production, anything along the space, Tesla stock, like that, I really feel like is a huge opportunity. And so far, it feels like, I play a little bit in this space, it feels like that may be the most sustainably harvested, the area where you can most sustainably produce these minerals is out of the sea floor. There's just very minimal amount of disruption as opposed to digging a huge open pit mine. And so I just feel like that specifically right now is a massive opportunity that a few people are playing in that has the potential to grow.
John has, I think, a unique competitive advantage with Palau. I mean, I think that they're, Fiji, actually they've had a couple of coups. They've now had two democratically elected prime ministers now back to back, and I think he's standing for election this year. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But there's some unique entries, barriers to entry, I would say. They're just like, I always exhorted them, I said, whatever you can do to become more competitive, regulatory-wise, taxation-wise, bureaucracy-wise. It is a developing world with a semi-recent history, but there is a significant gravitational pull there, and again, there are advocates on the ground there, and Fiji USA Business Council can assist in Fiji specific. And again, the embassies are always great. John held the capacity at the embassy where he helped it. So, John, do you have anything to add?
Perhaps the best way I can summarize is to say this. There's a reason that the President of the United States is in Asia today. He arrived in Korea, and he'll be moving on to Japan. The Indo-Pacific is the future. We are going to need to tap and develop our investment and business ties to the markets of Asia. And I think sometimes the markets in the islands are forgotten, but they are an integral part of everything that we do in the larger Asian market. We talked about rare earth minerals, we talked about services, we talked about capital infrastructure projects. Everything that the U.S. is great at, there's opportunity for this in the Pacific Islands. And I think that same tools that we have available from the U.S. government for large-scale investments in large Asian nations are equally available to small and medium enterprises who seek to invest and trade and develop partnerships with businesses in the Pacific Islands. And in the aggregate, I think you're going to make some great investments as a result. I'll give you an example, just maybe this will stick in people's minds, about Palau. The president here likes to say that Palau maybe is the next Singapore or the next India. Different scale, but think about it. safe, stable market, English-speaking, use the US dollar, the time difference is in their favor in terms of the markets back home in the US. They are a perfect partner to support US business in so many ways. And really that's the message. And US embassies and US ambassadors, all of us are here to support American business.
A little pitch for Palau, and John may have a better sense of this, but I had heard or read that there was an effort underway, I think, to offer themselves as a refuge for those that perhaps will be leaving Hong Kong or are going to leave Hong Kong for Singapore and elsewhere. I think they began a process, John, to establish a corporate registry similar that we have to what we have in Delaware. I'm not sure where that stands, but is it?
But we don't have time, and we haven't even touched upon some of the new areas of potential revenue in terms of crypto, cyber, all of the new technologies that are coming online that also can be communicative and provide opportunities for U.S. business. So the future is the Indo-Pacific region.
I think I'll also add that Palau, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the very few countries with diplomatic ties to Taiwan. So returning again to this national security and economic security, which I know you're all tired of hearing me say, it matters in this particular region and worldwide. And I think with that, we'll open this up to questions. Frank?
I have a question for clarification. Several years ago, I looked into seafloor mining for those rare earths. And as you noted, there was a multinational consortium that was looking at the development of that. But at the time, if I recall correctly, the U.S. was not participating in that, or was not a signatory. Has that changed, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you on specifically on that. Maybe one of the ambassadors did, but I do know that there are, I'll call it, that's a great example, Australian companies working on it. I know Canadian companies playing in that space. So whether it's U.S., I don't know, but there are allied countries and companies playing in that space. So maybe a better response to the specific.
Just reflecting again that I'm not sure to what degree we're engaged on the International Seabed Authority, but just an observation is that obviously we have to be stewards of God's creation. There is a big push by many in the environmental movement, very passionate, but little Nauru of island of 10,000 people went before the Seabed Authority. All of these articles populated the media universe about the injuriousness, and there may be technology that can be more injurious to whatever life may exist in some of these zones. Some life just may not exist on the seabed in some areas, but there is some that that has been designed that will only extract the nodules, and I know there's a concern about things turning up and disrupting. So I think there is a way to get to yes on this rather than get to no, but my experience was that there was just like, can't even talk about that. You have to see that floor cannot be touched, no way, never go how. Which is okay. I think that there is a prudent approach. I think the technology is there, and just be transparent about it and go forward. I think it's an important time to do it. We spoke very eloquently about that.
All right, any other questions back there? Yes, Marianne? It's about the...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Morning. I'm Mendiola-Long from the Puerto Rico deck. And for us in Puerto Rico, Caribbean island try to be the same as in the Pacific Ocean, okay? But we're suffering a very high impact of the Jones Act on our costs that make some exports to our neighbors in the Caribbean basin almost impossible, especially those countries with lower level of average income, such as Guadeloupe, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. What would be from your point of view, the best strategy to overcome those struggles we are facing?
That is not an uncomplex question.
Try it.
So I'm gonna hand off to the elder statesman.
I'd be happy to answer. I have to believe that I didn't hear all of the question. I did hear the reference to the Jones Act, guess some reference to unfair competition, but I apologize. It was hard to hear the question here in Palau.
So how to John, how to, I guess, navigate, how to around those,
Let me try that. The question, I believe, is how to navigate around Jones Act's limitations, essentially,
In such an inflationary scenario,
especially in the
we are
present.
facing,
Yeah, especially in the present inflationary scenarios that we are facing. In other words, how do you get creative with transportation, shipping, and other infrastructure in at various island regions? Something? Want to see that?
John, one thought, I guess I had John waxing eloquent here. I know that I do wonder whether, in light of the pandemic, and it's been such a disruptive, and I think you could argue from the national defense standpoint, and that's one of the bases that the Jones Act can be waived. So perhaps a waiver could be approved for not only the Caribbean bases of other island states. John, that's all.
Yeah, no,
I have.
I get the question. I lived in Hawaii. I understand the issues of shipping a little bit as a resident. And now that I'm in Palau, I certainly understand supply chain issues which have come ever more to the fore because of the global pandemic. You know, I did listen to the president speak. He was speaking at the Samsung factory in Korea today, talking about that Samsung is going to be opening up a semiconductor chip plant in the state of Texas. And he was pointing out that some of the old models just don't work. You know, this just-in-time delivery obviously has been completely disrupted by the pandemic. And Americans, not just in the islands, are being affected by things not on their store shelves. That's all true. So I do think this is an opportunity for people to take another look at the Jones Act and to think through, because this was unexpected. The pandemic was novel by definition. To see what may be possible as we look at this again. Because obviously, no one wants to have mothers hunting for baby formula. You know, no one wants to not be able to find what they need on their store shelves. And I think the push to ensure that we are not reliant on sole suppliers of key materials, you know, will prompt another look at these regulations, which are somewhat historic, obviously. And I think possibly well-intentioned at the time. The world moves on, and this is an opportunity to take another look at that. And obviously, Congress will play a key role in this. And I would encourage businesses and members there in the audience, you know, raise this with your representatives. Because this is an opportune time to have another look, particularly at the transportation issues of commerce. Because we have seen during this pandemic that they are under strain. That's a challenge. So the opportunity is to let's revisit this and perhaps improve it.
I may be a little more bullish in my response on this, if it's okay. I mean, so when I was at XM, the two biggest things that everybody came to talk to us about were U.S. content and the Jones Act. And everybody walked through our doors, only wanted to talk about those two issues. Just to be transparent. So the people at XM know this problem, and the people across the U.S. government know this problem. So we did our best to try to find and standardize the content policy. I talked about that a little bit yesterday, which aligned it hopefully better in some instances with the Advocacy Center of the Department of Commerce, which has a much more flexible content policy, and that should be standardized, in my opinion, across the U.S. government. One. With respect to the Jones Act, I mean, there are specific groups that are holding up any discussion about the Jones Act and the willingness to revisit it and have discussions on that. And typically they're organized labor groups. And so I think there is a need to educate people on the realities of the ground and how the U.S. Shipping industry has been decimated over the years because of this. And so I don't think there's been a comprehensive report put together, at least not one that we could find, that articulated the real problems here that we could use as a tool to go educate people in the right possible way. And I agree that the timing is great, given you can now weave in this story of how this impacted us during the pandemic. At the same time, the current administration's close proximity with labor groups, I think, probably politically doesn't give them a whole lot of room to negotiate right now with that. So I would say the work that needs to be done today is the legwork to get that report prepared for when another administration comes into play, who may have more of a willingness to go and renegotiate the discussion.
Max?
Oh, for the second project. Good morning. I want to address an issue that Ambassador Palau mentioned regarding exploration of the seabed. In this particular case, by the Chinese and the Palau government being concerned. I know that a couple of years ago, Palau started having conversations regarding the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, and the U.S. position has been not to be part of the treaty. But there's been conversations of rethinking that position because of Chinese overactive engagement in the sea straits in the Southeast China and in the Philippines and now here in Palau. Would the U.S. position or a change in the U.S. position benefit Palau's current situation in terms of having more of a protected area of those 300 commercial miles of outside their coast, or Palau being a member of the UN Convention on the Seas, what is the treaty obligations that the U.S. have vis-a-vis China and the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas? I know that was sort of convoluted, but I think that the bottom line is, if Palau is part of the convention, under the treaty, does the U.S. then protect, or have the obligation to protect that sea jurisdiction of economic commerce? Thanks.
Okay, I think I heard most of the question, and again, these are great and complex questions. So I appreciate the level of interest and sophistication in the room. Let me try to parse it out a little bit. On the defense and security side, that's based on the compact of free association between the United States and Palau. And under that compact, we provide substantial assistance to assist Palau in monitoring its exclusive economic zone. And that's principally provided by the U.S. Coast Guard working with the Department of Maritime Law Enforcement here in Palau. And that covers a whole range of support and assistance and partnership. The issue of the law of the sea is slightly different. As you mentioned, that has not been approved by the U.S. Congress. It's been with the U.S. Congress a number of years. It's old enough, and I'm old enough, that I wrote a paper about this in graduate school, decades ago. So this has been kicking around a very long time. I would say that in practice, the U.S. respects much of the articles of the law of the sea in terms of freedom of navigation, and we do a number of activities to insist on the right that the freedom of seas is protected. And our Navy, not just our Coast Guard, is particularly active in that regard, but they're slightly different. And in terms of the PRC research vessels moving into Palau's EEZ, as well as unreported, unregistered, and illegal fishing, yes, the U.S. Coast Guard has come to the assistance of Palau. Just recently, while I've been ambassador, Coast Guard and Palau worked together to detain the Chinese fishing vessel that was fishing illegally in the south of Palau. So we do actively work with Palau and support Palau in terms of defending and monitoring and maintaining the sovereignty of its exclusive economic zone. So we do a lot in that space, but the law of the sea is somewhat separate from our responsibilities under the Compact for Defense and Security of Palau.
I think we have time for one last question here. We're closing at 11:30, so anybody else? Any more victims? Good. All right, well, thank you to our panelists.